everybody for joining us. And we will be taking questions and answers in the chat and having a section at the end of the discussion for questions and answers. And thank you all of our speakers for making time in such busy agendas to be with us. Dr. Garcia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Roxana. It's a pleasure to be here. And I will try to share with you the experience that we have in Peru. So let's go back to 2011 and the beginnings on talking about research integrity. Ethics and responsible conduct of research are, at this point, emerging issues, especially now with so much research going on in developing countries. But despite several efforts toward developing capacities in ethics in research involving human subjects, significant issues such as plagiarism, cheating, or other issues related with research misconduct have not been sufficiently addressed in countries like Peru. So I have to tell you that in our culture and in our educational systems, not always issues like ethics are emphasized, or practices that had to do with scientific writing or ethical norms. And only until recently, in high school and college education, nobody was relying on writing papers or on getting skills in this area, and they were often not adequately developed. In addition, even in the academic culture, we tended to be excessively lenient in cases of plagiarism and cheating. And these events in most occasions were ignored or even considered acceptable for the local context and because of the lack of resources. And this reminds me a little bit all the issues that I have been discussing also related to corruption. It's like, I mean, in general and in the health sector, right? It is like, that's the way it is, and we should live with that. So that was in the beginnings, and if I'm able to change the slide, let me see. Okay, so even organizations such as our university, I come from Cayetano Heredia University, did not have a single university-wide academic code to inform students regarding the ethics of university life. And the university really relied on the individual efforts of each school to regulate or enforce adequate practices. Topics as plagiarism, cheating were barely mentioned in the guidelines of the School of Medicine or the School of Graduate Studies, and there were no definitions or examples, for example, related to these two key issues. So in this context, we work at the School of Public Health. Willie is one of the, you will meet him, he's one of the faculty members, and Roxana Lezcano is another one. We sat together and said, like, there is something that we need to do regarding research integrity and all these issues that really were surrounding us in the academic practice. So there was this opportunity of presenting and actually it was mainly a supplement to a training grant that we already had that had to do with informatics. And we saw the opportunity of maybe bringing something of all these issues that we were seeing around and to try to address the gaps in research, the responsible conduct of research training. So we decided to write this grant that we entitled a And actually what we were proposing was to address all the training gaps among undergraduates and postgraduates, students, as well as researchers at the university, but then use this as validating materials that could be used eventually in Peru and could be free for other Latin American countries. And actually we were a little, maybe, I mean, for a small grant, we were trying to do a lot, okay? We proposed to do structured surveys to university officials, professors, and students to try to have a baseline of what people knew and what was happening related to RCR. We also suggested and included to do focus groups. And then with all that information, once it was analyzed, to try to have our first on-site course with a pre-test and a post-test questionnaires, and try to get also the feeling of the people about what was most important, what were the needs, etc. We also decided to do interviews regarding mentoring, which was another area that we saw that was quite important and was not really developed in our university and not even in the country. And with all that information, we decided to develop an online course that we aim to address all these gaps in training. So in 2013, we finally launched our course. It was an online course with 7 modules in Spanish that could be offered at non-cost and could offer also certification if the student passed the test. And this is the link where you can access, and the course is there. We started in 2013. It had gone through improvements, etc. But we started to move it initially at the School of Public Health with our students and with researchers and with all the people that were participating in our research studies. Then, in 2014, working with the university, we were able to create a new policy regarding RCR at the level of the university. So that was a year after we launched the course, which mainly, for the very first time, the university was addressing the issue of responsible conduct based on honesty, rigorous data analysis, commitment to truth, adherence to professional standards, and scientific integrity. And the other thing that we were able to get, and actually this was approved at the University Assembly in September 2014, was the importance to create the Office of Research Integrity and how to strengthen it. And also, this RCR scores became mandatory to anybody who will be presenting a thesis or any type of research proposal at the university. So we went from the idea to the course to a policy at the level of the university. But actually we didn't stop there. We kept moving and we start discussions with the National Council of Science and Technology in Peru, CONCITEC. The National Council of Science and Technology is this entity that around in 2016 or 2015, for the very first time, started to provide small funds for research in Peru. And actually, we started to talk about the importance of research integrity, which they catch very fast, okay? And initially, they started recommending all the researchers that were going to apply for funding to take the course. But by 2017, the course was required, okay, for anybody who will present these proposals. But not only that, we started working with them on the development of norms and procedures regarding responsible conduct in research for one of the offices, which is called SINACID, which has to do with all the funding and also with the registration of all the people that are working in research, the researchers in the country. And we have been evolving this relation, so now CONCITEC has the platform for the course, but not only that, we're now in the process of signing an agreement, so the university will be working together with CONCITEC with the maintenance, the improvements of this course, to keep a bank of cases for training and to have regularly, at least once a year, a symposium or a course really for the whole country and the whole region, all the regions regarding research integrity. So our course is also accessible for whoever wants in the Latin American region to access to it through the Global Health Network. So finally, because this was just an introduction, so I think without planning it, we have been able to go from an idea, a frustration, an idea, a grant, information, a course, a policy at the university, and at the policy at the national level, Okay, and so far to date, there are more than 30,859 people who have taken the course and have a certificate in the country, and we will continue counting. Okay, to our knowledge, this is the first effort in Latin America to start local and regional discussions and to set up research integrity offices in local universities, but also that had gone at a national level. And we are sharing the resources. And actually, we're very proud. I mean, we did this starting at the university, as I said, but we will continue because we think that it's quite important to keep raising awareness, to promote training, and to have a positive culture that will promote responsible conduct in research. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Great start. Zoe, the floor is yours. Patty, ¿retiras tu presentación?
Momento, por favor. ¿Ok? ¿Todo bien? You can see it, Roxana?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Garcia, for describing the wonderful environment that has grown and thrived even in the last few years in Peru and also throughout Latin America through some of the partnerships that your university has forged, and also really inspiring us to learn more about what other countries are doing, particularly starting from the grassroots and the bottom up. So it is my honor to be able to really learn from you and exchange ideas with all of you, and also to be able to look at the worst case scenario. So what happens when we do not have a policy and procedure in place? And this is also possible that even when we have a policy in place or a procedure, if it's not followed, there can be problems, and there may not be enough clarity within the policy to guide us in particular instances, because as Dr. Folger, Nicole will describe also, every case is very different. And I'm sure you've had this in your experience, Roxana and Willie and Dr. Garcia. So even when you have a policy and a clear procedure, each time, sometimes you have to navigate very differently and you find a way that you might modify your policy. So without a policy, it's obviously very difficult to define what integrity is, and therefore a lack of integrity or misconduct, and how to that is doing research, whether it's a research institute or academic setting. And the students, staff, and faculty collaborators don't know which guidelines they should follow and what procedures they should follow if they questionable practice, that they are not certain they can trust the research. And so those who are accused of misconduct when there is a lack of a policy can also be completely naive and not understanding what their rights are. If they have a right to review evidence or a right to be presumed innocent, for example, before they are found guilty of misconduct with proper levels of evidence. So if we don't know what integrity is, first of all, how do we know that we are breaking our values and breaking our rules to such an extent that we have breaches of integrity? We don't. So that's where policies and procedures come into play. So I'm going to tell you a worst case scenario, and those who know me will say this is not my style. Usually I like to talk about the best case and the positive, optimistic side. So unfortunately, I have seen many instances and examples where various things happen when there even is a policy. So it was easy enough to think about, well, in the absence of a policy, it can be even worse. So coming to Peru or even anywhere, South America, anywhere in the world, we have a postdoctoral student named Maria Luisa, and she is concerned about some possible problems. She thinks it's been falsified in the data, and it's about an experiment in which she was involved. So she approaches her supervisor and says, I'm not able to understand this graph the way it is being described, and it doesn't seem to be consistent with the experiment we conducted. Can you please tell me why it looks so strange? And he yells at her and gets very upset and tells her to go away. And then he goes back to his computer and click, 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 deletes everything that shows where the data originated, all of the raw data, and also the communications between himself and the other people involved in the experiment. So now there is no way to tell who did what. So Maria Luisa goes to her department chair. She thinks, well, my supervisor got angry, but maybe the department chair one level higher will be able to do something. But the department chair is a friend of her supervisor, and her department chair says to Maria Luisa, don't worry, I will take care of the problem. And I'm not good at winking. Nicole can wink, but she says, I will handle it, and nothing happens. So Maria Luisa waits a month, and she says, this is not right. I don't know what to do because we are thinking about submitting a grant application also based on this data, another manuscript, and I'm very worried. I don't know what to do. So she calls someone outside of the university setting who is her research collaborator. And this collaborator calls the president of the university and says, what is going on? How was this allegation handled? And the university president, after now hearing from the funding agency, calls Dr. Desonesto into his office. And Dr. Desonesto, who is very rico suave, he comes in and reminds the president how much money he brings in through his grant applications and all of his publications in high impact journals. And he is very famous. Everybody knows his work. So the university president says, yes, you are right. Very important point. And then he says, oh, let's just make this go away. And he sweeps under the rug the allegation without any exploration of whether the allegation could have merit or could be true or false. So Dr. Desonesto's questionable data is now published in a prestigious journal. And Maria Luisa is a co-author. She is obviously very worried because she had concerns about the data, but it never seemed to get resolved. Her name is now on the data that she believes to be false. And another scientist reading the work, who happens to be an expert institution, discovers the results and contacts the journal editor as well as the local newspaper. So the journal editor and the newspaper both call the university and say, okay, what's going on here? The perfect, it's impeccable, he's a fantastic researcher, he's been here many years, he's very famous, he knows what he's doing. Instead, the source of the problem is Maria Luisa. She falsified the data in the graph and she has been terminated. We cut off her jobs, her grants. She is no longer at the university. And the journalist from the newspaper is a bit curious about this and calls Maria Luisa for an interview, where she tells her story about the fact that she was not treated fairly and there was no due process or procedural fairness in the process at all. The funding agency reads the article in the newspaper and decides to conduct an audit on this university to see, something must be going on here. Let's look. They have no policy, no procedure. I don't think we can support their work if we don't know the money we are giving to the university to conduct research is being used responsibly. Therefore, we are going to pull not only Dr. Desonesto, that kind of research, and maybe let's pull some of this research funding over here too, because we need to teach this university a lesson. in addition, several other international researchers who have been working as collaborators with Dr. Desonesto and his team decide to pull out, and they begin to scrutinize their articles and collaborative work they have been doing with Dr. Desonesto for many years. So the university president, Dr. Desonesto, and the department chair are under the microscope now. And Maria Luisa, she is still looking for another job. So this is the bad story. This is one example of the way things can go when there is no policy or procedure. And Dr. Garcia, as you've just described, you have started a policy and a procedure, and you now have a process in place and mandatory responsible conduct of research training, which is wonderful. People understanding what they need to do in order to follow the universally agreed upon values and codes of responsible research. So one of the most important things about this process, if one is starting a policy or procedure, is to ensure that it has these elements. There are many, many details, and there are many guidelines, including the European Code of Conduct for Research, Integrity in Research, which Dr. Folger knows more about. I have as resources at the end, as well as many other international and national codes. Most importantly, things are documented and very clearly recorded so that there is a record not only of any inquiry into an allegation of research misconduct or questionable practice, any breach of integrity, but also that the process is fair and protects those involved, including the person who is accused. And you see the little individual on the top. She is, in many jurisdictions, the person called the Research Integrity Officer, and she is basically in charge of making sure the policy is followed, and every single person in the process, what kind of individual they are, will be protected. Even if they are angry or hiding or deceptive, they still have rights under the process. And the group beneath the respondent there is also the faculty peers who help sometimes make a decision about whether there was a problem or a breach of integrity. And most importantly, perhaps, for other people and the whole community at the university, is that the procedures are clear and publicly available. So if I am coming from another institution, I know what I need to do in order to raise a concern, and I also know what I can do to protect myself if a concern is brought against me. As far as establishing an office, as Dr. Garcia described, it is very important. You did the surveys and spoke to people about what they might know and what they might need. So involving the faculty and the staff and the entire research community in development of a policy as well as an office can be very helpful, because then it doesn't seem as though it's imposed upon them. Instead, they are part of the development of a culture of research integrity. And having a safe place where people can go with their concerns that is private, and they can, if possible, submit anonymous complaints, protecting those who raise concerns. And this can also be sometimes through channels like research integrity champions, who are capable of talking with the person who might not know what to do, and then they can go and be the liaison and speak with the research integrity officer or another leader. And some kind of coordination across the campus so that everyone knows what is happening and how the procedures are followed. Ideally, in a happy world, this helps us create a positive, thriving research environment. And as I mentioned, there are several different guidelines. I just point out the European Code of Conduct, a fairly recent report by the National Academy of Sciences in the US, and some other resources for you to use. And to note that our friends, those of us on the phone call, are very much hoping that we will be able to welcome you to the World Conference on Research Integrity in Cape Town. If not next year, perhaps the year after, but in some form, we will be together as we were in Melbourne, as we planned for the last conference in Hong Kong. Here is with us on the call today, we also have Dr. Lex Bouter from Amsterdam, Forum, who is one of the co-chairs of that conference. So I wish we were in person, but I thank you, Roxana, for welcoming us to this wonderful occasion to learn from each other. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Excellent discussion points. We are taking note.
Okay.
We are moving on to Nicole from Austria. Nicole, are you ready? Yeah.
I'm ready. Thanks a lot, Roxana. I think for Zoe it was a good morning. For me it's a good evening. It's now evening here in Vienna. The topic I would like to speak about today is a little bit about the situation in Europe and the European Network of Research Integrity Offices, just to give you some idea about it. And then I will also speak about some topics you already heard about, like raising awareness, training on research integrity, advising, and all this kind of more positive procedures in this context. The situation in Europe, as you will see, is shows a quite diversified research integrity landscape. The different European countries have chosen very, very different approaches how to handle research integrity issues within their country. So we do have some countries with a national investigatory authority, like, for example, in Northern European countries, in Norway, for example, or in Denmark. But we also have countries where there is one research performing or one research funding organization which takes the lead and is the investigatory authority on the national level. Other possibilities are, for example, in Germany, where we have a national research integrity mediating organization. Of course, they cannot mediate any kind of cases of research misconduct like data falsification or fabrication, but they can try to mediate when it's about an authorship conflict, for example, or other issues. We also have countries with research integrity promoting or supporting or advisory platforms. For example, we have this in Netherlands, where they try to have a networking of different researchers on research integrity. We also have this in France, where we have a network on research integrity officers, but also on training, like a training platform. We do have national organizations investigating research misconduct cases and promoting research integrity. That's, for example, Austria, so the agency I'm working for. And of course, we also have still a lot of countries without any national research integrity structure. Unfortunately, yes. Just a short overview about the European Network of Research Integrity Offices, which is called ENRIO. It was founded in 2007-2008, right after the first World Conference on Research Integrity, which took place at that time in Europe, in Lisbon. At that time, it was only it was a first meeting with only 8 representatives, but today we have more than 30 member organizations from 24 European countries. I gave you here the link to the website, and you can check out like our motive here is we are ENRIO, we are all. What is ENRIO doing? So of course there is a lot of expertise and knowledge. So it's about the exchange of information and experiences. We still can learn if we already have a structure and procedures in place. Of course we still can improve it and learn from all others. But ENRIO also tries to support and advise members where there are countries without having any national research integrity structure. And we had some working groups, for example, one on investigation, where one of the outcomes is a very nice handbook. It's called the ENRIO Handbook, Recommendations for the Investigation of Research Misconduct. And there was also a working group on training, for example. So that was about Europe and ENRIO, but the topic of today is also how to promote research integrity at an institutional level. And I continue a little bit with what Zoe already said. It's so important to have clear guidelines and policies. And once you have them, then it's even more important to share them with each other, because sometimes they are there, but nobody knows that they are there and where they are. So it's important not to hide them in a kind of intranet or wherever. They should be easily accessible, for example, on the website. And then I guess in your country, it's the same situation than in ours. English is not our mother language, but we do have a lot of international researchers. And so it's very important that those guidelines and policies are also available in English. Next point is, so once you know that there are guidelines and policies, as Zoe already said, it's very important that there are also individual or institutions, for example, on the national level, which are, for example, responsible for promoting research integrity, but maybe in other cases also responsible for handling cases of research misconduct and allegations. So it's quite important also to know who are these people and how can I contact them. That's also very important for your own institution. If you hide those people, nobody can find them. So it's really important that that also this information is easily accessible for everyone. Also here that it's also accessible in English, of course. Those guidelines and policies can, of course, be part of employment contracts, for example, or also for part of grant agreements. For example, the European Commission, whenever they fund a project, everyone has to sign the grant agreement, and in the grant agreement, researchers also sign the European Code of Conduct. So they have to adhere to these rules of good scientific practice. And of course, other institutions from other countries, from abroad, I can only recommend strongly that you have collaboration agreements, and within these agreements you also find an agreement on who is going to investigate, for example, a case of research misconduct within this consortium. Strengthening a culture of research integrity is, I think, most important, and it's also a key in raising awareness for our most favorite topic today. One of these things mentioned here is always the wise incentive management, which is it's a nice phrase, but what does it mean exactly? The incentives we currently mostly have is counting impact factors and counting publications. We also call these perverse incentives. So I will give you an example for wise incentive management, the Hong Kong principles, and I will show you those Hong Kong principles in the next slide. Also very important is to have a positive culture of research integrity, which also means that you can speak openly about mistakes, for example. You know, there are also mistakes which can happen during a research process, and it's very important that you can openly discuss it with your supervisor, for example. So in order not to be, to think that you have to hide them and then maybe fabricate and falsify even more data. It's also very important what kind of work environment you have and if there is a nice work satisfaction. So coming to the Hong Kong principles, why they are called Hong Kong principles. The last World Conference on Research Integrity took place in Hong Kong, and one of the initiatives there was to think or rethink researchers' assessment, to go away from only counting impact factors, but also to think about other possibilities of what should be valued and what should be acknowledged. Principle number 1 says assess responsible research practices. That means more or less from conception to delivery, so from the research idea until, you know, collecting data, archiving data, all these kind of things until it is published and communicated. Principle number 2 says value complete reporting. So, you know, sometimes you have a hypothesis and then you do a lot of experiments in data, and then you find out some of these data absolutely do not match your hypothesis, and we sometimes also call them negative data. But it might be very important what this kind of negative data are. So it's really important that you always do a complete reporting of research regardless of the results. Principle number 3 says reward the practice of open science, or also called open research. So this can also be open data, you know, open methods, open codes, and of course also open access publications. Principle number 4 says acknowledge a broad range of research activities. That can be like blue sky research, it could be meta studies, it could be reproducibility studies, it can also be research on research, and all of this is very important. And principle number 5 says recognize essential other tasks, like, for example, what researchers do, like peer review, mentoring, and other kind of things. Especially mentoring is something very important, but it's currently not often so much recognized and valued when researchers are assessed. You can find here under this link the Hong Kong principles, which are explained in much more detail and which just have been published a few days ago in PLOS Biology. So, as said before, raising awareness, research integrity training, mentoring, advising, all those things are key for positive research integrity culture. I would like to show you here the Bonn Printiga statement. This is the outcome of an project called Printiga, which was funded by the European Commission. And as you see here, it's as you can see here, how to strengthen the research integrity. I think it's quite loud here now.
¿Tú le ayudas? ¿Qué? Ah, perdón. Espera.
Okay, I try again. Strengthening a research integrity culture. So what you find here is that it's the responsibility of top and middle management to set the standards for an acceptable conduct and contribute to sharing good research practices. Most important, leaders at all levels must themselves be good role models. You know, everyone is learning from them, and must strive for and communicate clear expectations of research integrity. In general, senior colleagues should contribute to the socialization of more junior colleagues into a good integrity culture. I really like this phrase a lot, and I think there is a lot of important things here in these lines. About training and mentoring, and we already heard in the first presentation about training. Training is not only for early career researchers, it should be done at all levels. It should be a kind of career-long commitment. Possible is also to establish train-the-trainer workshops, you know, to have the same knowledge and to give this knowledge to the next generations. And very important, this is what we see in a lot of cases of research misconduct. There is a lack of good supervision. So it's very important to have a clear alignment in supervision relationships. So, which means on the one hand, who is the supervisor? But on the other hand, also what do supervisor and supervisee expect from each other? I'd just like to give two examples. One example from Austria. So we here at the Austrian Agency for Research Integrity established a national train-the-trainer course. For whom is it? It's for university teachers, it's for researchers, it's for example. For supervisors, of course, it's for ombudspersons at universities or research institutions. It's for all kind of individuals who are interested in the subject of research integrity. In our case, it's a 2-day course. If you want to know more about it, you can also check this website where I gave the link to. And the other example I wanted to show you is from the European Network of Research Ethics and Research Integrity, which was also a project funded by the European Commission. And here we established an ENERI classroom. For whom is this classroom? So actually it's about the people we talked about today already. It's research integrity advisory boards, for example. It can be committees handling allegations or working with research integrity policy development, or research integrity officers or advisors or ombudspersons. And also here you will find the link to the ENERI classroom if you're interested in this. I like to hand over to Francis with the promotion, again, like also Zoe already showed, for the World Conference, which takes place in Cape Town.
Gracias to you, Nicole. Wonderful tips on how to implement training approaches and how to make them long-lasting throughout the life. Thank you very much. So we are moving on to Francis and the anatomy of the African research landscape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosanna, for inviting me to this meeting. And thank you, Zoe, Patricia, and for the introductions. It's really a pleasure to be part of this this meeting. I think the previous two presenters have really done a great job in terms of just giving an overview of what could happen in the event that there are no procedures or there are no policies in place, and what is the value of having procedures in place. I want to talk about the landscape of research integrity within the African context, and I'm going to give you a very brief flavor of what the African continent is all about and its diversity, and what this diversity means in the context of research integrity. And then I'm going to be introducing to you the African Research Integrity Network and what it has done within its membership and what we have been able to learn within the network. And then I'm going to conclude with a few remarks. So as many of you might be able to know, Africa is a large continent, the second largest continent in the world, with a total of 54 countries. And it is rich in linguistic. Each of these countries have multiple languages and with a very rich cultural and religious diversity. Africa is also endowed with a very rich knowledge system that is influenced by a number of factors, including different intellectual traditions and indigenous knowledge that also influences how people perceive different practices, different policies, different procedures. And of course, talking about that diversity, it also means that even within the context of research integrity, the meaning and the understanding of research integrity may differ within very different contexts. So when I talk about 54 countries with very different cultures, different understandings, this could also trickle down to how each of these countries also understand and perceive what research integrity is all about. The current literature, and of course, Patricia has already alluded to the fact that there may not be a very common terminology that could be able to define what research integrity is in each and every context. So which means different contexts might understand research integrity in different ways. Now, in a context like Africa, where it's so diverse, this might also complicate how people understand, like I've already said, how people understand and how people practice, research integrity. We have, for example, in this literature where, certain settings, like, for example, where plagiarism, which is one of the biggest sins in, of research misconduct, could be understood as a way of, appreciating or acknowledging, senior, professionals by cutting and pasting what, professionals or, previous academians have written or have said about certain subjects. And this could also, of course, influence how, we talk about plagiarism and how we mentor people against these vices. And of course, within the African context, we know that, the diversity also comes with different paradigms. For example, there are those people who believe in individualism and self-interest. And of course, this could also influence the way they practice research. Of course, this could have a very, strong influence in research misconduct, where people think about research in terms of just meeting their own selfish interest. Whereas other paradigms or other, concepts such as Ubuntu, I'm not sure if, you have heard about this term, but Ubuntu is a philosophy within the African context, which means more, it's sort of more caring about one another. The idea of I am because you are, so, I exist because you exist, and therefore all of us need each other. And that concept then might introduce the issue about being responsible for each other. And if we nurture that kind of understanding and that kind of philosophy, it means then even within the context of conducting research, we must always endeavor to care about each other, and therefore we must conduct research more responsibly. But then we also must remember that Africa comes from the context where there has been a lot of, historical injustices, which could also influence, the trust, between, collaborative research. And this, of course, could affect whether, new, emerging issues like open science, data sharing are practiced, where if there's mistrust, then it means people might not be so much forthcoming with, open science or sharing of data. And this, all these, paradigms and all these, ideas can have a very significant effect in terms of how, people practice, research integrity or the responsible conduct of research as a whole. Now, allow me to introduce to you now the African research integrity, and I'm going then to be able to link that diversity with this network. So African research integrity is a network that brings together like-minded people from the African continent, but of course with other friends from outside of Africa. It was conceived during the 4th World Conference on Research Integrity that was held in 2015 in Brazil. Within that context, a few delegates from Africa, I think it was less than 10, met, and we could easily realize the gap that was there in terms of not just the representation from Africa, but also the fact that there were really no initiatives that were geared towards promoting responsible conduct of research within the African continent. After this conference, the few delegates who were there started this initiative with the aim of promoting research integrity and more so responsible conduct of research in Africa. Of course, through sharing and alignment and leveraging of available resources and ideas and engagement of individuals, institutions, governments, as well as policy makers in Africa. In essence, the delegates were feeling that there was a very big gap in terms of, research integrity activities within the African continent. And we came together and said something needs to be done. And nobody will do this if we don't come together to do it. So together we agreed to, take a step forward and do something. Specifically, the aim was to develop a better understanding, because obviously people were a bit quote unquote ignorant about research integrity. If you talk about research ethics, this is something very common in Africa, but research integrity isn't as common as it's supposed to be. So we endeavored to create a better understanding and sensitize people about the local environment, conditions, and the context that affect African research integrity practices, and more so to create awareness and improve access to relevant information and resources as a way of just bettering the understanding, and create and nurture leadership in responsible conduct of research. And lastly, to create a dialogue, engagement, and networking among African policymakers, stakeholders, and practitioners of research integrity. And so by end of May this year, we had managed to bring together a total of 65 members who had registered and actually filled in a registration form to be part of this network. And these 65 members came from a total of 11 countries. We, of course, have what we call Friends of ARIN. These are amounting to about 10 people from the US, from and Europe. So one of the important things that I really want to share tonight, which is very relevant to this call, is what we have been able to, to collect within our membership. What is happening across board? Obviously, this kind of data wasn't available by the time we were establishing the African Research Integrity Network. At the moment, I also must say that we have not been able to really conduct any kind of empirical or systematic assessment or survey to be able to collect this data, which I think is very, very critical to developing a good understanding of what exactly is happening within the African context. But through our networking and membership, we have been able to identify that within 5 different countries, especially in Nigeria, there are organizations that are, or people who have come together to conduct plagiarism workshops, especially the Nigerian Young Academy of Science that decided to conduct plagiarism workshops within different regions in a bid to create awareness and awareness about plagiarism and ensure that this vice is minimized or eradicated. There's also more recently an institution that has been able to begin the steps towards establishing an Office of Research Integrity. This is really in very infancy stage, but this information has already reached us that this is something that is being developed, and we are really supporting this organization toward this goal. We also have an institution in Kenya, the Moi University, that received funding from the Office of Research Integrity in the US to develop an institutional research misconduct policy for the university. However, when I was invited to support this institution towards this initiative, we broadened this goal towards developing not just an institutional policy on research misconduct, but a research integrity policy that will not only guide the institution, but we hope to sell it out to the government so that it becomes a national policy. Of course, this is still in progress, but work is ongoing. We also have the National Council for Science and Technology in Uganda that is also in the process of developing a research integrity policy for the country. In Malawi, there are only activities related to research integrity in essence of training postgraduate students about research integrity. But there's no policy, there's no a research integrity officer, just the training that is being offered. And then we have a research integrity, a research office and development within the University of Botswana, which among other things also receive information and investigate about research misconduct practices. Nothing more than that. And I think the country that is well within the African context, which we could say is more advanced in terms of research integrity, is South Africa, which so far it has a total of 13 institutions that have been able to submit annual returns to the Office of Research Integrity in the US by virtue of having received funding from the Office of Research Integrity. And it is a requirement that if you receive funding, you have to submit annual returns. And this has forced these countries, these institutions in a way to start to establish offices of research integrity or conduct research integrity practices within the research ethics offices. We also have 3 universities that so far have research integrity officers, and a total of 5 universities that have some kind of, quote in quotes, some kind of research integrity policies. So in a way, these findings tell us, how, really, at infant stage, Africa is in terms of developing policies towards strengthening research integrity. This I've already told you about, but it's just a summary of what I've said, that in total, we have 5 countries that have, in a way, some research integrity related activities, and this includes offices of research integrity officers that have been employed specifically to double up as research ethics officers as well as research integrity officers. We also have a number of, I think a couple of educational programs that are running in Malawi and in Nigeria, and institutional or national policies that are at different stages of development. None of this is fully developed at the moment. And as I already said, this data has not been collected with using any systematic or empirical methods. We have collected this information based on our networking and sharing of information within our network. So the lessons that we have been able to learn within the network is that within the educational programs, we've been able to record that these educational programs have reported an increased awareness, especially in terms of research integrity, but also in Nigeria specifically, they have reported a reduction in plagiarism practices. In terms of the institutions that have developed research integrity, they have reported an enhanced clarity in terms of how to deal with cases of research misconduct, and especially transparency in managing research integrity issues. And I think this supports very well what the rest of the previous speakers have already talked about. At the national level, I must say that even as much as we have seen institutions struggling to develop policies and in a way establish offices of research integrity, there has been very limited support, so to speak, in terms of national and institutional support to develop and adapt research integrity frameworks. And I have already said that within the African context, there's a lot of knowledge and understanding and popularity in terms of research ethics, but research integrity is still very, very alien. And I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done around this area. Now, we have learned that through the African Research Integrity Network, as small as it is, we have been able to reach out to many people. We have been able to ignite, the interest. A lot of people reach out to us, they write to us to seek how we can help them. We still feel that a lot still needs to be done. But we think with this kind of approach where we can share information, we can sensitize people about what research integrity is all about in our own small way, we can be able to make a big difference. And indeed, as the African Research Integrity Network, we've been able to, make a difference. We have been involved in a number of, international, initiatives, including conferences, workshops. We've been able to feature in important, high impact, journals, just as we thrive towards, creating awareness. And we think, in the same way that the African Research Integrity started very organically, but also have been able to achieve so much, than we could imagine initially. We think that the academic institutions with the African continent, also as much as they are currently lagging behind, they have such a big potential to really develop institutional and create an environment where research integrity thrives if they receive adequate support. So I want to end there and really acknowledge, all the people who have made this a success, especially the institutions that I was talking about, the Uganda National Council of Science and Technology, Moi University, the Nigerian Young Academy, University of Malawi, and also the steering committee of, ARIN. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Lots of food for thought in this at this early stage. Thank you, Francis. And we are moving on to Willy's remarks, and the floor remains open for questions. Whoever is interested, just write them down on the chat. We're answering them as we see them, and we will be happy to post them to our guest speakers today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this session, a very important topic for different parts of the world, as you can clearly see. And I want to focus on what should we attack next? What should be our next stage? And what is the adequate path, or what are possibilities for a path forward? So first, it is important. I think Patty made a really good description of the steps that have been achieved along the way, and same as our African colleagues, it's important to leave a paper trail, a track record of what we've studied. And we've come from a negative experience, similar to African colleagues, with plagiarism, cheating, and other issues of research and academic integrity towards a more a positive response to it, understanding the role of not just regulations, but also the possibility of working with our younger scientists and establish mentoring programs. So in this line, I think the experience from different parts of the world suggests that we can act on different levels. There's a national level, there's an institutional level, there are levels of the entities that can actually implement many of these activities into place, and there's the community of investigators and students. So there are things that can and need to be done in all of these levels, from establishing regulatory frameworks, national research integrity boards, or other procedures according to the level that of progress that a country has established. We heard about the regional, the continental networks in Africa and in other regions. That's also another possibility if the situation is ripe for it. But there's also an institutional level of activities in which you need to have not just policies in place, but also you need to have operational processes and organization. In a sense, you can have all the policies written down, but if the office is not actively disseminating the role within the institution, and if they're not acting upon situations or concerns or worries or specific reports of research integrity, the policies don't work, as one of our preceding speakers have described. Faculty and students need to be thoroughly informed. Sometimes the policy exists, but the community is unaware. And some of us think that this type of trainings, like the RCR course that is now required for writing grants and submitting grants, should be just mandatory for everybody, and for most of us is when we attend postgraduate school abroad or some other training. So, but I think a lot can be done more at the grassroots levels. And there are two groups where I think there can be a lot of interest and traction to explicitly include research integrity as part of the vision and the activity. So there are two groups with science really takes place. That is, one is research groups. And that's why scientists need to be very involved, and the directors of research units, they need to be directly involved with this and take this issue as one of ours, the issue of research integrity, because we want to be actively sharing the best practices with our young scientists. Similarly, when you have a doctoral program or where you have masters in science, or even undergraduate programs geared towards scientific training or scientific experience, in all of these spaces, there needs to be explicit inclusion of research integrity activities. And we also believe in, as Patty has mentioned before, the importance of mentoring programs in these levels. We all think that it should be institutional as well, but if the institution is not ready yet, or the resources are not ready, a great place to start are these two entities, research groups and science training programs. And of course, the community, investigators, faculty in university, students need to be aware, compliant, and fairly aligned with these concepts. It cannot just be, the concept cannot just stay in one side of the community, otherwise it won't be effective. So the question for some of us who are starting or trying to expand is how we go about this. And some of our experience have been bottom up and have been very successful, because we found leaders, we found people like Patty who carried the flag and took it multiple important places, and then you convince people in the upper levels, and now we have national policies. But I think in general, where you find traction and commitment, that's probably a good place to start. You may be able to have very good traction at the national level, at the continental level, and that's where to start. But you may not be at that stage yet, and you need to start at the lower level with one research group at a time or one doctoral program at a time. And we think that baby steps are important, and to progressively build up and learning the process. This goes with the next point as well. We see this as an implementation science issue, in which you work in pilots, you work with short-term projects, but maintaining a long-term vision, but on short-term goals that then you can build up, you can develop good practices, indicators, approaches. And that's some of what we published before in our mentoring supplement, trying to develop a whole framework of how to implement mentoring in low and middle income countries. And issues to start, it seems like the universal issue is academic integrity problems that then are a good bridge to move into research integrity and plagiarism in the case of research and science, like papers and grants. but academic integrity is such a huge issue of concern for institutions, for universities, that's a place where you usually get a lot of traction and a lot of support when you have committed authorities and leaders. And other issues after plagiarism in research in science are probably authorship issues and conflict of interest that are very common in everybody's mind. So there you can get good support and then expand to the whole agenda and bring on the rest of the agenda. But these are topics that most people identify as important and common. And lastly, I think we definitely need networks to share, but networks in the sense of the academic networks where we can go and freely be in disagreement and discussion and share different views and be wrong and be corrected over time. Sometimes these networks become formalities and they become too ingrained in our bureaucracy that they don't necessarily are productive. So these need to be proactive, progressive networks where we learn from our past mistakes and we are happy to admit that we were wrong so we can learn. So I would like to finish bringing you the Research Integrity Challenge for this and next year. And all of you who are in this, listening to this, who are interested in this topic, I would like to throw you this challenge to get engaged, to find something in one of these levels where you think you can gain traction and establish goals in 1 year or in 6 months. And maybe Roxana can invite us again or can invite a different group again to come back and say where we are. What did we do? What were the successes? What were the lessons learned, the indicators, and what are the next steps? So with that, I'd like to thank again the organizers for the opportunity. This is a terribly important topic, and as a researcher, I think it's as important as to produce good papers and grants. The research integrity is right up at that level. Thank you very much.
Very well. I think we've all agreed on the closing. Willie's closing remarks have pretty much summarized what everybody has expressed during their presentations. I am looking at the chat for questions. I don't see. Is anybody interested in speaking up? I can translate your questions if you would prefer. If you want to do them in Spanish. I'm going to unmute.
Buenas tardes. Sí, soy Mercedes Arabia.
Meche, qué gusto.
Sí, Roxana, muchas gracias por la invitación. Sí, quería saber si hay algún mecanismo ya establecido por otras academias para generar este tipo de políticas en las universidades acá en el Perú. Entonces, quisiera saber si ya existen, digamos, protocolos o políticas que ya están por implementar en nuestro país, ¿no? Que tanta falta hace lo de integridad.
So I'm going to give the floor to Patty, but I'm going to translate the question for our foreign speakers. The question from Dr. Sarabia, who leads one of the medical schools in Lima, is whether there are initiatives already in Peru to set up research integrity offices. And so I'm going to let Patty answer that one, but if anybody is interested in chipping in, please do.
Sí, ¿qué tal? ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Mira, Cayetano comenzó con esto, tal como lo comenté, en el entre el año 2012 al 2014. Y realmente lo que hicimos también, y estuvimos trabajando tanto con Rosana como con Willy, promoviendo el desarrollo de estas políticas en otras universidades. Comenzando por eso, comenzando por promover el reconocimiento de la importancia de la conducta responsable en investigación, primero, y luego para poder compartir la experiencia de Cayetano en la creación de esta oficina que tiene el objetivo de prevenir, por un lado que es importante, promoviendo el entrenamiento, qué cosa es, qué es lo que se debe hacer, qué es lo que no se debe hacer, pero también teniendo políticas claras para poder hacer detección y finalmente para poder tomar acciones cuando esto sucede. Entonces, yo lo que te diría es, no es que desde el Estado se está haciendo, somos las mismas, el sector académico, desde Cayetano ha comenzado esto, pero lo que sí es hubo un salto, porque a pesar de habernos estado reuniendo, y Roxana lo sabe, por eso se ríe un poco, pero haber estado haciendo una serie de reuniones en todos estos años, invitando gente, excepto yo diría por algunas conversaciones que se ha tenido, que creo que Católica comenzó a tomar alguno de estos aspectos, ¿no? Muchas de las otras no lo vieron, pero quien sí vio este tema muy claramente fue el CONCITEC. Entonces, CONCITEC vendría a ser quien ha asumido, más bien ya desde su rol de promoción de la investigación, etcétera, ha promovido las prácticas de conducta responsable, un condicionamiento absolutamente que es el mínimo de haber tomado este curso, ¿cierto? Y ha desarrollado, porque está prácticamente ya consolidando lo que vendría a ser la oficina en la que recibiría alegatos, finalmente, cuando hay conducta que no es apropiada en investigación, relacionada con los fondos que ellos proponen para la investigación. O sea, sería la parte central, pero no es que tengamos una entidad gubernamental que vaya a pedir esto o que vaya tampoco a hacerlo en la parte académica. Sin embargo, lo que te ofrecemos es que en base a la experiencia, y eso es un poco, ¿no? Retomando todo esto, podemos compartir lo que se ha hecho, que todavía falta, porque creo que sí es importante que un mayor número de nosotros como entidades académicas comencemos a poner esto como un punto fundamental, tal como lo dijo Willy. No solamente es el tema de hacer investigación, sino es hacer investigación que se base justamente en una conducta honesta. Eso es una cuestión básica y eso es lo que estamos proponiendo. I'm sorry, I said it I'm sorry, basically what I was explaining is that we do not have a governmental policy for research integrity in all academic institutions, okay? That's not how it works. What we do have is at the National Council of Science and Technology, which is governmental. We have a policy for research integrity for all the people that consider themselves researchers and are part of this national database. And if they want to access any type of funding from CONCITEC, but what I was offering was the experience that we already have at our university, that we have been trying to share it with different academic institutions. Few of them have started to understand what this means, but maybe it's the right time and we can restart, Roxana, Willy, we can restart this movement within the academia. I think it's the right moment since we are seeing so many things happening. We are seeing more money being moved in research. So maybe we were doing it too early, and right now is the right time. Thanks.
Gracias, doctora García.
If I may, Rox and Patty, I would like to add that the National Board of Accreditation of Universities, SUNEDU, made it part of their licensing process that universities should have ethics guidelines that then were understood also as including research integrity, and that's the perpetual confusion between ethics and integrity and research integrity. And also that means procedures in an office and action. So academic institutions are required to have that as part of their licensing processes. And I think Patty is right on as usual, because now that the licensing process is finishing, as the last universities are getting a license, now they need to have these entities operational. And that's the moment to strengthen them and make sure that those entities work, that those policies are being applied. As we've seen in Cayetano, having the documents doesn't necessarily mean that the policies are in play, are working.
I was just going to add to that, Roxana, if I may, and I know Nicole can speak to this as well, that as I described in the case of the Pobrecita Maria Luisa, it's much better to begin before you have a big case. and a big problem where the journal, the press, the scientific community, the funding agency are involved. And so it's wonderful that you are doing this at the early stages. Yo comprendo el español, pero yo no hablo. But I wanted to say, when you say it's maybe early, but it's also wonderful. We've seen in jurisdictions around the world, those countries that have nothing really in place, and then they quick try to jump and put something in place. They look for models, and maybe they don't have time to go through the process of the surveys, all of the things that you've done at the University Cayetano Heredia. So it's fantastic. And in fact, others who are learning Maria Saravia also, it's a good time to start and learn from those like Dr. Garcia and Lexanos who are doing this already. And I think Nicole can speak to that too, that it's helping each other, and as Francis described with Ubuntu, carrying together so that we are creating this beautiful environment of integrity where we share with each other.
Thank you so.
Perhaps I could just add on that discussion and say, so I talked about Moi University and how they invited me to, contribute to their efforts in developing a research misconduct policy. And when I sat in to listen to the discussion, I sort of took a step back and thought, okay, so why should we go ahead and develop a research misconduct policy when people are not even, aware, or they're not even knowledgeable about what we are talking about? We haven't, told people what is expected of them. They do not even understand what their responsibility is all about. And here we are busy developing a research, misconduct policy. Of course, people are going to commit, research misconduct, but then how do we hold them, responsible or accountable for their acts if we haven't been able to actually tell them what their responsibilities is all about? And I think it is within that discussion that we realize perhaps it's important to begin small, and then because it's so easy for us to begin to climb the tree from the top, if you see what I mean, and begin to have all these policies about research misconduct and how to investigate and how to punish, quote unquote. But then I think it is extremely important and this is also has also been highlighted in Zoe's presentation. It is extremely important to nurture that environment where people are educated and made knowledgeable about what is their responsibility in responsible research conduct, so that when you get to that level where you talk about research misconduct, investigating people, at least you can refer them to their responsibility, what was expected of them. So I think we really need to start small, and I think I have learned a lot from how ARIN has developed from really nothing to where it is now, where we think about, there's a whole lot of things that are happening, globally, but, without any, enough resources, we can do a lot within the limited resources that we have. And even sharing resources and letting people understand what are their responsibilities within the research environment, I think it is extremely important. So, I just wanted to share that experience. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you allow me, Francis, I think we have so many similarities. For us, it was quite important to understand what people were thinking, if they have any experience of problems of misconduct, if they consider that misconduct. I mean, these issues of plagiarism I will copy what they are doing because they are I mean, it was like, I can copy what they are doing because it's good to copy what the other does because they are doing it so well. Or this issue of, oh, okay, that's not bad because it's a white lie. I mean, there are so many cultural things that you need to start changing that if you don't understand them, you cannot approach them. So, and then completely agree with you, the importance of first understanding the context. The second thing is addressing those issues so they know the new rules. I mean, what should be different and why it should be different. And then later on, once people know what we're expecting from them, start thinking about the offices, how to punish, etc. And that's a process that we have gone through, really. It's not an easy one. There's still a lot to do, even with authorship. In authorship, it was everybody believed that the chief of the office had to be an author because he's the chief of the office, okay? And there were so many abuses. Some people will say that's an abuse, but they said that's the way it is. So it was so incredible, and it was, for some people, it was crazy, but for others it was like relieving. I knew that that was not right when they learned through the course and through the discussions that authorship has to be gained by participating in a specific way, not because you are the chief, for example. So I think it has been a process. It has taken some years, but it's quite important.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. And even the terminologies that you use, they make such a big difference. I remember during that workshop, we spent nearly 3 hours just trying to agree what is the difference between fabrication and falsification. So, and finding, local terms that can be able to be understood by the research community so that when you talk about fabrication, it speaks to them like this is what, they mean by fabrication and this is what they mean by falsification. That is extremely important. But also extremely important is the ability to plant that seed, quote unquote, in them so that it's sort of moral intuition that can be able to remind people, you know what, this is wrong, as opposed to looking up in that office and say, I will hide this because that office doesn't accept that I do this. It should be coming from within them so that if they do something wrong, it provokes their moral instinct so that they know this is something bad. I should avoid doing this because it is not good for the research enterprise. If you see what I mean.
Yep.
Willy, ¿querías decir algo?
No, sorry. I already mentioned the issue about the licensing. Maybe just to respond to one of the comments in the chat, that integrity is not research ethics. They're very different issues, particularly is not human subject research ethics. They are lumped together by a common confusion, but ethic committees, IRVs, do not handle, and they're not equipped to handle research integrity issues. They should be separate entities because research integrity can apply to poetry or law or engineering or many things with no participation of human subjects. And we should try to separate it. And I think even here in Peru, there's a lot of confusion in regulatory entities about those two subjects. And they need their separate management because they have their own specificities.
Thank you very much. Well, the time has come. So before we all go, I want to thank our very, very busy speakers from all over the world, our gracious hosts for an amazing discussion. All of the presentations and the recording will be available at the same Emerge webpage where you have seen this. I'm also leaving you with my email. If you are interested in setting up a research integrity office in your organization, we can work together in order to prepare the documentation that your organization agrees with, but it also one that also meets international standards and avoids this confusion that is very typical. People think that informed consent is a research integrity issue. Informed consent is a human subject protection issue, which is already a component of research integrity. So we need to keep those separate. Additionally, I wanted to mention for those interested is that in Hong Kong, we actually started a research integrity network for Latin America. So it was a witness to this creation, and we haven't really done very much, but I think this is a good moment to open the network to all of the participants in this discussion and to any others who might be interested. So thank you very much. Let's move research integrity forward. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. 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 Bye.
Gracias.
Bye. Bye.
Gracias a todos.
Gracias. Gracias, Roxana.
Bye, gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias, gracias.
Gracias, Roxana.
Gracias.